Imagine working the night shift at a seemingly ordinary clinic in Alberta. Now imagine a rule book that dictates everything from how you breathe to what you see or don't see. What if breaking one of these bizarre rules could have chilling consequences? This isn't just a job. It's a terrifying game of survival. My name is Elena Hartley, and 3 weeks ago, I accepted a position as a night shift nurse at the Clearwater Medical Clinic in rural Alberta. The pay was exceptional, almost suspiciously so, but I needed the money. Student loans don't pay themselves, and opportunities in small-town healthcare were scarce. During my interview, the hiring manager, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Pemberton, barely made eye contact. She slid a manila folder across her desk and said only 4 words that should have sent me running. "Read this. Follow everything." The folder contained what I initially assumed was a standard employee handbook, protocol for medical emergencies, patient privacy guidelines, the usual bureaucratic nonsense. But tucked between pages about shift schedules and parking assignments was a single laminated sheet titled Night Shift Protocols, Mandatory Compliance. The rules written there made my blood run cold, though at the time, I convinced myself they were some kind of bizarre hazing ritual for new employees. My first night began at 11 p.m. The clinic sat at the edge of town, surrounded by dense pine forests that seemed to swallow the moonlight whole. The building itself was a relic from the 1960s, all faded brick and narrow windows that reflected nothing but darkness. As I pushed through the heavy front doors, the scent of antiseptic and something else, something musty and old, filled my nostrils. The fluorescent lights in the main hallway flickered in an irregular pattern, creating shadows that danced across the checkered linoleum floor. The day shift nurse, a woman named Patricia, was already gathering her belongings when I arrived. She looked exhausted, deep purple circles beneath her eyes that suggested weeks of insufficient sleep. When I introduced myself, she flinched as though I'd startled her from some dark reverie. "You're the new night nurse," she stated rather than asked. Her gaze flickered to the laminated rule sheet I'd clipped to my clipboard. "You read them." I nodded, uncertain what else to say. Patricia's expression softened slightly, though worry still creased her forehead. "Good. Don't think they're jokes, Elena. They're not. Every single one exists for a reason." She glanced down the hallway toward the eastern wing, where patient rooms lined both sides. "Especially Rule 1. Whatever you do, stay away from room 3B after midnight. I don't care what you hear. I don't care if it sounds like someone's dying in there. You do not enter that room." Before I could ask why, Patricia grabbed her coat and practically ran for the exit. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, and suddenly I was alone. The silence that followed was oppressive, thick enough to feel against my skin. I stood in the reception area, the only sound the quiet hum of the ancient computer monitor and my own shallow breathing. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight. 13 minutes until whatever happened in room 3B began. I decided to familiarize myself with the layout before the witching hour arrived. The clinic was small by urban standards, but sprawling in its design. The main hallway branched into 3 wings: east, west, and north. The eastern wing housed patient rooms numbered 1A through 8B. The western wing contained examination rooms, a small laboratory, and storage. The northern wing, according to my orientation packet, held the break room, administrative offices, and the old waiting room that hadn't been used in years. As I walked through the eastern wing, I noted that most rooms were empty. Budget cuts had reduced the clinic's overnight capacity to just 4 patients, all currently housed in rooms far from 3B. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Room 3B's door was different from the others. While every other patient room had a window panel allowing staff to check on occupants without entering, 3B's door was solid wood, painted an odd shade of green that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Room closed for maintenance. Do not enter." The sign was yellowed with age, the tape brittle and peeling. This room hadn't been under maintenance recently. As I stood there, staring at that door, the temperature around me dropped noticeably. My breath formed small clouds in the air. That's when I remembered Rule 2. If the temperature suddenly drops, check the reception desk for a note. Do not read it aloud. My heart hammering, I hurried back to the reception area. The desk was exactly as Patricia had left it, neat and organized. I searched the surface, finding nothing unusual until I opened the top drawer. Inside lay a crisp, white envelope, unsealed, with my name written across the front in elegant cursive handwriting. My hands trembled as I extracted the single sheet of paper inside. The note contained 3 sentences. She's waiting for someone. She thinks it might be you. Don't let her be right. The pronouns made my skin crawl. Who is she? I wanted to read the words aloud, to hear them spoken and make them feel less ominous. But Rule 2 explicitly forbade it. I folded the note and placed it back in the drawer, my mind racing. These rules weren't hazing. They weren't jokes. Something was fundamentally wrong with this clinic, and I just locked myself inside for the next 9 hours. The clock now read 12:03 a.m. I'd missed the exact moment of midnight while reading the note. From somewhere down the eastern wing came a sound that turned my blood to ice. A child's laughter, high and clear, echoing through the empty hallway. It was coming from room 3B. Every instinct screamed at me to investigate. I was a nurse. If someone was in distress, if a child needed help, my duty was clear. But Patricia's warning echoed in my memory, and Rule 1 was unambiguous. Never enter room 3B after midnight, no matter what you hear. The laughter continued, now mixed with singing, a nursery rhyme I didn't recognize. The melody was wrong somehow, the intervals between notes just slightly off, creating a dissonance that made my teeth ache. I forced myself to turn away, to walk back toward the reception area. The singing followed me, growing louder rather than softer as I increased the distance. When I finally reached the main desk, the sound cut off abruptly, leaving only the oppressive silence once more. I realized I was crying, tears streaming down my face without my conscious awareness. What kind of place was this? The rest of the night crawled by with agonizing slowness. I threw myself into busy work, organizing supply cabinets, reviewing patient charts, anything to keep my mind occupied. But every shadow seemed to move independently, and every creak of the old building's settling made me jump. At 2:47 a.m., as I was restocking bandages in the western wing, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured footsteps that echoed off the tile floor. I turned to find a man in a white coat standing at the end of the hallway. He was tall, his face obscured by shadows despite the overhead lights. The coat was pristine, impossibly white, and he carried a clipboard tucked under one arm. For a moment, relief flooded through me. Another staff member. I wasn't alone. Then I remembered Rule 4. If you see a doctor you don't recognize after 3 a.m., offer them coffee. Do not ask their name. But it wasn't 3 a.m. yet. I had 13 minutes. The doctor, or whatever he was, stood motionless, watching me. I could feel his gaze despite being unable to see his eyes. Should I speak? Should I run? The rules said nothing about encounters before 3 a.m. Slowly, trying to appear calm, I gathered my supplies and backed away toward the main hallway. The figure didn't move, didn't react, simply stood there like a statue. When I finally broke line of sight by turning the corner, I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the break room in the northern wing. The light was on, just as it should be according to Rule 3. Always keep the break room light on, even if it's empty. They don't like the dark. I collapsed into a chair, my chest heaving, and tried to process what I had seen. The break room was small but comfortable, with a worn couch, a kitchenette, and a small table with 4 chairs. A coffee maker sat on the counter, already prepared, the power light glowing red. On the table was another laminated card, smaller than the rule sheet, but in the same format. It read, "You're doing well. Stay strong. Morning always comes." Someone, presumably a previous night shift worker, had left this message for future employees. The gesture should have been comforting, but instead it terrified me. How many others had sat in this room, reading these same words, trying to survive until dawn? How many had failed? The clock on a break room wall showed 3:02 a.m. I'd lost track of time while running. If that doctor was still in the Western Wing, and if he appeared after 3 a.m., I would need to follow Rule 4. The thought of approaching that figure, of offering him coffee, and being close enough to see whatever face hid in those shadows, made my stomach churn with dread. But I couldn't hide in the break room all night. I had actual patients to monitor, medications to administer, rounds to complete. I was still a nurse, still bound by professional duty despite the supernatural nightmare surrounding me. Taking a deep breath, I stood and walked back toward the Western Wing, a cup of coffee prepared and clutched in my trembling hands. The hallway was empty. The doctor had vanished. The next 3 hours passed in a state of hyper-awareness that left every nerve ending raw and exposed. I completed my rounds mechanically, checking on the 4 patients currently admitted to the clinic. All were elderly, recovering from minor procedures or waiting for transport to larger facilities in the morning. They slept peacefully, oblivious to the strangeness permeating the building around them. I envied their ignorance. At 4:30 a.m., I found myself in the Northern Wing's abandoned waiting room, drawn there by compulsion I couldn't quite explain. The room hadn't been used in years according to Mrs. Pemberton, replaced by a newer, larger space near the main entrance. But someone still maintained it. The chairs were dust-free, arranged in neat rows facing a television that hadn't worked since the 1990s. In the corner sat an old radio, its fabric speaker cloth faded and torn. Static whispered from it, a constant white noise that should have been irritating, but instead felt almost comforting. Rule 5 stated, "The old radio in the waiting room plays static until dawn. Never unplug it. The silence is worse." I approached the radio cautiously, studying its ancient dial and worn wooden case. Why would anyone want this thing running? The static was pointless, energy wasting, and yet, as I stood there listening, I began to hear patterns in the noise, almost like voices, speaking words just below the threshold of comprehension. My hand reached toward the power cord, fingers inches from unplugging it, when the voices suddenly became clear. "Don't," they whispered in unison, dozens of voices overlapping, male and female, young and old. "Don't leave us alone in the dark." I jerked my hand back as though burned, stumbling backward into one of the waiting room chairs. The voices faded back into static, leaving me shaking and confused. Who were they? Why were they trapped in a radio? And what happened in the silence they so desperately feared? I didn't want to find out. Rule 5 existed for a reason, just like all the others. Every prohibition, every strange instruction, was written in someone else's blood and terror. I left the waiting room quickly, fighting the urge to run, and returned to the relative safety of the reception desk. The night dragged on with agonizing slowness. At 5:15 a.m., I decided to review the clinic's history, hoping to find some explanation for the bizarre rules governing my shift. The administrative office was unlocked, and inside I found filing cabinets dating back to the clinic's opening in 1967. The files were remarkably complete, including incident reports, staff complaints, and even police reports. What I discovered in those yellowed pages made my blood run cold. The clinic had experienced an unusual number of deaths over the years, far more than similar facilities. Patients who died in their sleep with expressions of absolute terror frozen on their faces. Staff members who quit without notice or, in 3 cases, simply vanished without ever being seen again. One particularly disturbing report from 1982 described a night nurse named Jennifer Blackwood who was found catatonic at the reception desk. Her hair turned completely white overnight. She never spoke again, but the most chilling documents concerned room 3B. In 1971, a 6-year-old girl named Lily Morgenstern had been admitted with pneumonia. According to the records, she recovered quickly and was scheduled for discharge. But on her last night in the clinic, something went wrong. The attending physician's report was nearly illegible, written in a shaking hand that spoke of panic and disbelief. "The child is gone," it read. "The room is empty, but we can still hear her singing. The door was locked from the inside. There are no windows. She cannot be gone, and yet she is." Search parties found nothing. Police investigated, but ultimately classified Lily as a runaway, despite the impossibility of her escape. The room was closed immediately after, declared under maintenance indefinitely. That was 54 years ago. The same sign still hung on the door today. As I read Lily's file, the temperature in the office plummeted. My breath formed clouds, and frost began to spread across the desk surface. Rule 2 activated once more. Heart pounding, I rushed to the reception desk and found another envelope waiting in the drawer, this one sealed with wax. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and extracted the note. "She knows you found the truth. She's been waiting so long for someone to look, for someone to remember her. But you cannot help her, Elena. No one can. She's too far gone into whatever darkness took her. Stay away from 3B. Please." The handwriting was different this time, more frantic, less controlled. Whoever wrote these notes knew the clinic's secrets intimately. But why leave warnings instead of answers? Why not simply tell new employees about Lily and what happened to her? Unless they didn't know. Unless the entity in room 3B had become something far removed from the sick child she'd once been. I thought of the laughter I'd heard, the nursery rhymes sung in that off-key voice. Was that Lily? Or something wearing her memory like a mask? The question haunted me as I returned the file to its cabinet and left the administrative office. Dawn was still 2 hours away. 2 hours during which anything could happen. At 6 a.m. exactly, I encountered the doctor again. He stood in the main hallway, exactly where the eastern and western wings converged, blocking my path to the reception desk. In the better lighting, I could finally see his face and immediately wished I couldn't. His features were wrong, asymmetrical in ways that suggested something wearing a human disguise without quite understanding the proper proportions. His eyes were too far apart, his mouth too wide, and his skin had a waxy quality that reminded me of funeral homes. "Coffee," I said, my voice cracking with fear. I held out the cup I prepared earlier, now cold but still full. "Would you like some coffee?" The doctor's too wide mouth curved into something approximating a smile. "How thoughtful," he said in a voice that echoed strangely, as though coming from somewhere far away. He took the cup, but didn't drink, simply held it while those wrong eyes studied me. "You're doing well, Elena. Better than the last one." I wanted to ask what happened to the last one, but Rule 4 was explicit. Do not ask their name. I extrapolated that to mean don't ask them anything at all. So I stood there in silence, my skin crawling, while the thing pretending to be a doctor watched me with inhuman patience. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, he set the coffee cup down on a nearby windowsill. "She asks about you," he said conversationally. "The girl in 3B. She hears you walking the halls and wonders if you'll visit. I tell her no, that you're a good girl who follows the rules. But she hopes anyway. Hope is all she has left." Then he simply faded away, his body becoming translucent and then invisible, leaving only the coffee cup as evidence he'd ever existed. I grabbed the wall for support, my legs threatening to give out. Where's this place? What had I gotten myself into? The break room light flickered. Just once, but enough to send panic shooting through my veins. Rule 3 was clear about keeping that light on. They don't like the dark. Who were they? I ran to the break room, flipping light switches along the way, flooding every hallway with illumination. The break room light had stabilized, burning bright and steady. But as I stood in the doorway, I saw something that made my breath catch. Sitting at the table where the encouraging note had been was a child's drawing, rendered in crayon on construction paper. It depicted a stick-figure girl with yellow hair standing in a green room. Around her floated other figures, darker, with red eyes and reaching hands. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "They came when the lights went out. Now they won't leave." Lily had drawn this. Somehow, across decades and impossible boundaries, she'd left me a message. The entity in room 3B wasn't just haunting the clinic. It was communicating, trying to warn me. But warn me about what? About the dark figures in her drawing? About what happens when lights go out? I thought about Jennifer Blackwood, the nurse found catatonic in 1982. Her incident report mentioned that several lights in the northern wing had blown out simultaneously during her shift. She'd been found near the break room, her mind shattered by something she'd witnessed in the darkness. The implications were terrifying. The rules weren't just protecting us from individual entities. They were maintaining a delicate balance, keeping multiple threats contained through specific actions. The light in the break room held something at bay. The radio static prevented another thing from manifesting. Room 3B's prohibition kept Lily's entity isolated. And the strange doctor, whatever he was, seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time and space, appearing only when certain conditions were met. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I would finish this shift. I would collect my paycheck, and then I would never return to Clearwater Medical Clinic. Whatever secrets this place held, whatever tragedies had occurred within its walls, I wanted no part of it. Some mysteries were better left unsolved, some doors better left closed. But as I watched the sky gradually lighten through the eastern windows, I knew the truth. I would come back, not because I wanted to, but because someone had to. The night shift needed a nurse, and if I quit, some other unsuspecting person would take my place. They'd walk these halls without warnings, without understanding, and they might not survive their first encounter. I thought of the encouraging note in the break room. "You're doing well. Stay strong. Morning always comes." Whoever wrote that had felt the same obligation I now felt. They'd stayed despite the terror, despite the impossibility, because abandoning the post meant abandoning future victims to the darkness. At 7 a.m., Patricia pushed through the front doors, looking even more exhausted than the previous evening. She stopped when she saw me standing at the reception desk, clearly relieved I was still alive and sane. "You made it," she said softly. "Barely," I admitted. "Patricia, what is this place? What really happened here?" She sighed deeply, setting down her bag. "That's a long story, Elena, and I'm not sure I know all of it myself. But if you're coming back tonight, we should talk. Meet me at the diner across the street at noon. I'll tell you what I can." I nodded, too tired to argue. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave, I glanced back at the hallway leading to the eastern wing. Room 3B's door remained closed, the maintenance sign still hanging crookedly. But I swore I could hear, just barely, the sound of a child singing. Sleep didn't come easily after my first shift. I lay in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every horrifying moment. The doctor's wrong face, the voices in the static, Lily's crayon drawing appearing impossibly in the break room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that green door and heard the off-key singing echoing through empty hallways. At 11:45 a.m., I dragged myself out of bed and drove to the diner Patricia had mentioned. It was one of those timeless establishments that seem to exist in every small town, all vinyl booths and laminate countertops, the smell of coffee and grease hanging thick in the air. Patricia sat in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee already waiting. She looked even worse in daylight, her skin gray and her eyes haunted. "You came," she said as I slid into the seat across from her. It wasn't a question. I need to understand, I replied. If I'm going back tonight, I need to know what I'm dealing with. Patricia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, as though seeking warmth despite the diner's comfortable temperature. How much did you figure out on your own? Lily Morgenstern, room 3B. A little girl who disappeared in 1971, but somehow never left. I paused, organizing my thoughts. And something else. Multiple entities. The break room, the radio, that doctor. They're all separate, aren't they? Separate threats that the rules keep contained. You're perceptive. That'll help you survive. Patricia took a long sip of coffee. The clinic sits on cursed land, Elena. I don't know all the history, whether it's native burial grounds or something even older, but that location has always been wrong. The original building that stood there burned down in 1955, killing everyone inside. Before that, it was a boarding house where 3 people vanished in a single night. Before that, a family homestead where the entire family murdered each other during winter isolation. She pulled out a worn notebook from her purse, its pages covered in cramped handwriting and newspaper clippings. I've been researching for 2 years, ever since I started the day shift. Every location has its ghosts, Elena, but this place is different. It's not haunted. It's hungry. Hungry. The land itself feeds on human fear and suffering. It draws traumatic events to it like a magnet. And once something dies there, once something terrible happens within its boundaries, the land remembers. It keeps those moments alive, replaying them, strengthening them. Lily Morgenstern was just one tragedy among dozens, but she was young, innocent, and she died slowly. The land loved that. It made her death eternal. I felt sick. How did she die? The file said she disappeared. She didn't disappear. She was consumed. Patricia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. One of the night nurses in 1971, a woman named Dolores Finch, broke down years later and told the truth. She heard Lily screaming that final night, but when she ran to room 3B, the door wouldn't open. Not locked. It opened normally, but there was resistance, as though something on the other side was pulling it closed. When she finally got it open, the room was empty except for Lily's pajamas, neatly folded on the bed. But the walls were wrong. Wrong how? They were moving, breathing, and they were covered in handprints, tiny child-sized handprints, as though Lily had been pressed against every surface simultaneously. Dolores heard singing coming from inside the walls, Lily's voice begging to be let out. Then the door slammed shut and wouldn't open again. When maintenance finally removed it from the hinges 3 days later, the room was normal. Just an empty room with old wallpaper and a sad history. I thought of the laughter I'd heard, the singing, but she's still there, still trapped in that room somehow. Not in the room, in the space between. The land created a pocket, a fold in reality, and Lily exists there now. Neither alive nor fully dead, aware enough to suffer, but too far gone to be saved. The rules about room 3B exist because interaction strengthens her presence. The more attention she receives, the more real she becomes, and if she ever becomes real enough. Patricia didn't finish the sentence. What about the others? The doctor, the voices in the radio. Patricia flipped through her notebook, finding a page filled with sketches and annotations. The doctor is Dr. Harrison Vale. He worked here in the 1980s and was obsessed with the paranormal activity. He tried to communicate with Lily, broke multiple rules deliberately to see what would happen. One night, he simply stepped into the space between and never came back. But he's not trapped like Lily. He chose to exist there, to become part of the clinic's wrongness. He's dangerous in a different way, not actively malevolent, but alien enough that interaction with him can break your mind if you're not careful. The coffee ritual keeps him docile, satisfied that you're following protocol. And the radio, that's older than the clinic itself. The original boarding house had that same radio. When people disappeared from the boarding house in 1932, Witnesses reported hearing their voices coming from it, begging for help. The radio somehow captures lost souls, traps them in its static. The voices you heard are decades worth of victims, all merged together in endless white noise. If you unplug it, if you silence them, they'll manifest physically. All of them at once, confused and angry and desperate for release. 3 staff members tried it over the years. None survived. The diner's warmth suddenly felt insufficient. I was cold again, that same bone-deep chill from the clinic spreading through my body. Why doesn't anyone shut this place down? Why keep it operating if it's this dangerous? Because closing it wouldn't solve anything. Patricia's expression was grim. The lamb would still be there, still hungry. At least with the clinic, we have protocols, rules that keep the worst at bay. We provide a pressure valve, I suppose. Controlled exposure rather than random tragedy. Plus, where would you relocate the elderly patients? The nearest hospital is 2 hours away. This community needs medical care, even if it comes with a terrible price. Who wrote the rules? How does anyone know they work? Trial and error. Mostly error. She showed me another page in her notebook, this one listing names and dates. Jennifer Blackwood in 1982 discovered why the break room light matters. Thomas Garrett in 1995 learned about room 3B the hard way. Each rule is written in someone's suffering, proven through catastrophe. The current iteration of the rulebook is relatively stable. No deaths in almost 10 years, just incidents. Like the previous night nurse, Rebecca Holloway. She quit 3 months ago after encountering something we don't have a rule for yet. She won't talk about it, but she moved to Vancouver immediately after her final shift. Before her, we had a nurse who lasted 2 weeks before having a complete psychological break. Before that, 3 nurses in a row quit after single shifts. I realized the implications. That's why the pay is so high. You can't keep anyone. Exactly. Most people sense something wrong during their first night and never return. The fact that you're here, asking questions instead of running, means you're either braver or crazier than most. Patricia's smile was sad. Probably both. We sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in dark thoughts. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since I found Lily's drawing. Can she be helped? Is there any way to free her? Don't. Patricia's response was sharp, almost angry. Don't even think it, Elena. That path leads nowhere good. Others have tried. Dr. Vale tried. They all failed and became part of the problem instead of the solution. Lily is beyond our reach, beyond anyone's reach. The kindest thing we can do is follow the rules and let her fade into the static of the clinic's collective haunting. But I couldn't accept that. A 6-year-old child, trapped for over 50 years in a nightmare dimension, still aware enough to draw pictures and sing songs? There had to be something we could do, some way to grant her peace. The thought consumed me as Patricia and I parted ways, her heading home for sleep before her shift, me wandering the small town trying to process everything I'd learned. Clearwater was a dying place, its population dwindling as young people moved to cities and old-timers passed away. The clinic was one of the few businesses still operating at full capacity, though full meant something different here than in urban centers. I walked past boarded-up shops and houses with for-sale signs that had faded from years of sun exposure. The town was dying, but the clinic thrived. Fed on suffering, Patricia had said, grew stronger with each tragedy. At a small library near the town square, I spent several hours researching the land's history. Patricia was right. The location had always been cursed. Before the boarding house, before the homestead, the area had been avoided by indigenous peoples. One historical account mentioned a Cree elder warning settlers in the 1800s that the land was where spirits go to feed. Another described mysterious disappearances of fur traders who camped in that exact spot. The clinic was built on a concentrated node of supernatural energy, a place where reality wore thin. And every tragedy that occurred there strengthened that weakness. made it easier for other things to slip through. Lily wasn't the first victim. She wouldn't be the last. But she was the most prominent, the most aware, and therefore the most dangerous. As evening approached and my second shift loomed, I made a decision that would change everything. I would go back to the clinic. I would follow the rules. But I would also start looking for a way to free Lily Morgenstern from her eternal prison. Patricia said it was impossible, that others had failed. But I had to try. Because if I didn't, who would? At 10:45 p.m., I parked in the clinic's small lot and stared up at the building. In the darkness, with shadows pooling beneath its windows, it looked less like a medical facility and more like a monument to suffering. The lights inside flickered with that same irregular pattern, as though the building itself was breathing. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my bag and walked toward the entrance. Patricia was waiting in the reception area, her relief at seeing me obvious. "You came back. I wasn't sure you would. I need the money," I lied. The truth, that I couldn't abandon Lily or future night shift nurses, seemed too complicated to explain. Plus, I know the rules now. I'll be fine. Patricia didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. She gave me a final warning about staying alert, especially in the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. when activity seemed strongest, and then she left. The heavy doors closed behind her with a finality that made my heart sink. 9 hours until dawn. 9 hours alone with the darkness. I decided to start my shift with the rounds, checking on patients before the supernatural elements became active. All four were stable, sleeping peacefully. Room 3B's door remained closed, the maintenance sign untouched. But as I stood in the hallway, I could swear I felt eyes watching me from behind that green wood. Patient eyes, waiting eyes, hopeful eyes. "I'll find a way," I whispered, too quiet for anyone physical to hear. "I promise I'll try." The temperature didn't drop. No note appeared at the reception desk, but from behind the door came a sound I'll never forget. A single word, spoken in a child's voice filled with desperate longing. "Please." My second shift began much like the first, with oppressive silence and the weight of unseen eyes following my movements. But now I had context for the horror, understanding that made everything simultaneously better and worse. I knew why the rules existed, but that knowledge came with the terrible awareness that I was surrounded by suffering too profound to comprehend. Lily's single word, "Please," echoed in my mind as I tried to focus on routine tasks. At 12:17 a.m., the child's laughter began again from room 3B. This time I was prepared for it, but preparation didn't make it less unsettling. The melody was that same off-key nursery rhyme, the words just distorted enough to be incomprehensible. I forced myself to walk away, to honor Rule 1, but each step felt like betrayal. How many night shift nurses had walked these same halls, heard that same desperate song, and done nothing? The temperature dropped at 1:33 a.m. I retrieved the note from the reception desk drawer, this one written in childish handwriting with backwards letters and misspellings. "Thank you for listening. They say I can't leave, but maybe you're different. Maybe you can see me." The message was heartbreaking in its hope and terrifying in its implications. Lily was becoming aware of me specifically, focusing her attention in ways previous nurses hadn't experienced. Was this because I promised to help? Because I'd acknowledged her? At 2:45 a.m., I sat in the break room, nursing cold coffee and trying to formulate a plan. The research I'd done suggested that entities like Lily were bound by specific metaphysical laws. They couldn't simply be released. Their connection to the location ran too deep. But perhaps they could be transitioned, moved from tortured awareness to peaceful dissolution. I'd read about cleansing rituals, about objects that could anchor spirits and then be destroyed, about speaking words of release that severed supernatural bonds. The problem was that any attempt to help Lily would require breaking rules. I need to enter room 3B. I need to interact with her directly. And if I failed, if my attempt went wrong, I could make things catastrophically worse. I could end up trapped alongside her, or I could release something even more dangerous into the clinic. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. A sound pulled me from my thoughts. Footsteps in a hallway outside the break room. Slow, deliberate footsteps accompanied by the soft rustle of fabric. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. Too early for the doctor. He only appeared after 3 a.m. according to Rule 4. So I was walking the halls. I stood cautiously, moving to the break room doorway. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued, growing closer. Then I saw it, a shadow cast against the wall, human-shaped, but moving independently of any physical form. The shadow walked with purpose, its silhouette suggesting a person carrying something heavy. As it passed beneath an overhead light, it didn't disappear or fade. It simply continued, defying the laws of physics. This wasn't covered by the rules. This was something new, or perhaps something so rare that previous nurses hadn't documented it. I pressed myself against the doorframe, watching as the shadow approached the intersection where the northern wing met the main hallway. It stopped there, turning as though surveying the area, then slowly raised one arm to point directly at me. My blood turned to ice. It saw me. Somehow, despite being a two-dimensional shadow without eyes, it knew exactly where I was. We stayed frozen like that for what felt like hours, predator and prey locked in silent acknowledgement. Then the shadow began moving again, not toward me, but down the hallway leading to the eastern wing, toward room 3B. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the break room, to hide and wait for dawn. But curiosity and concern for Lily overrode my fear. If the shadow thing was heading to her room, I needed to know why. Keeping a safe distance, I followed it through the corridors. The shadow moved with unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking, its pointed fingers still extended like a compass needle. When it reached room 3B, it stopped. The green door remained closed, but the shadow didn't need doors. It simply flattened further and slipped beneath the gap at the bottom, disappearing into the room beyond. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the singing started again, but different this time. Lily's voice held a note of joy, of recognition, as though greeting an old friend. The shadow had been here before. It visited her regularly. But why? What was its purpose? Without thinking, driven by a need to understand, I reached for the door handle. My fingers were inches away when a hand grasped my wrist, cold and impossibly strong. I spun to find Dr. Vale standing behind me, his too wide mouth curved in what might have been concern or amusement. His expressions were too alien to read clearly. "Not yet," he said in that echoing voice. "You're not ready for what's inside, and she's not ready for you. Let go of me." I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "I'm saving your life, Elena. Rule 1 exists for a reason. If you open that door now, if you step into the space between without proper preparation, you'll be consumed just like Lily was. Your promise to her is admirable, but meaningless if you can't survive long enough to fulfill it." What was that shadow? Why does it visit her? Dr. Vale released my wrist, and I stumbled backward. He tilted his head, studying me with those wrong eyes. "That's the collector. It gathers fragments of lost souls, pieces that break off from entities like Lily when they've been trapped too long. Think of it as a scavenger, cleaning up the detritus of the space between. Without it, the clinic would be overrun with spiritual debris. Is it dangerous? Everything here is dangerous, Elena. But the collector is neutral. It performs a function, neither good nor evil. It simply is." He paused, glancing at the closed door. "You're different from the others who've worked here. You see the suffering and want to end it rather than simply endure it. That impulse will either save her or destroy you both." Before I could respond, he faded away, leaving me alone in the hallway with my racing thoughts. I wanted to pound on the door, to demand answers, to force my way inside and see Lily face to face. But Dr. Vale was right. I wasn't ready. I didn't have the knowledge or tools necessary to help her safely. Rushing in with good intentions would only create another tragedy. Frustrated and exhausted, I returned to the reception desk. The night was far from over, and I still had duties to perform. But as I reviewed patient charts and prepared medication for the morning shift, my mind worked on the problem of Lily Morgenstern. There had to be a way. Someone, somewhere, knew how to free his spirit from the space between. At 4:15 a.m., I heard the radio in the old waiting room change. The static suddenly clarified into distinct voices, dozens of them speaking over each other in a cacophony of desperate pleas. "Help us," they cried. "Remember us. Don't let us fade." I ran to the waiting room, terrified that the radio had somehow been unplugged, but it was still connected, still running. The voices had simply grown stronger, more coherent. I stood before the ancient device, listening to the chorus of the damned. How many souls were trapped in its static? How long had they been suffering? And could they be released the same way I hoped to release Lily? "Can you hear me?" I asked, feeling foolish but desperate for information. The voices coalesced into a single response, speaking in eerie unison. "We hear everything. We know everything that happens in this place. We've been here since the beginning. Do you know how to free someone from the space between? How to help Lily?" The unified voice laughed, a sound like wind through dead trees. "Free her. There is no freedom from the in-between. Only transfer. Only trade. One soul must take another's place, must anchor themselves in the dimensional fold while the trapped one escapes." That's how Dr. Vale entered. He took someone else's place. That's how the collector maintains balance. Everything here requires sacrifice, nurse, even mercy. The implications hit me like a physical blow. To free Lily, someone else would need to become trapped. Someone would need to voluntarily enter that nightmare dimension and remain there, possibly forever. Who would make that choice? Who could I ask to suffer for the sake of a child dead for over 50 years? "There's another way." The voices continued. "Destruction. If you destroy the anchor point, if you tear down the clinic itself, the souls trapped here would dissipate. Not freed, exactly, but released from awareness. An end to suffering through an end to existence. Burn down the clinic." It seems so simple, so final. But what about the patients currently here? What about the community that relied on this facility? And what if destroying the building didn't work? What if it only made things worse? Released all the trapped entities at once with nowhere to go but out into the world? "You're overthinking." The voices whispered, more gentle now. "You can't save everyone, Elena. You can barely save yourself. The best you can do is survive your shifts, follow the rules, and hope the darkness doesn't notice you too closely. That's what the smart ones do. That's how you make it to retirement." But I wasn't smart. Patricia had been right. I was either brave or crazy, and I was starting to suspect it was the latter. Because despite everything I'd learned, despite the warnings and the danger, I couldn't abandon Lily. That single word, please, had embedded itself in my heart like a fishhook, pulling me toward action regardless of consequences. The radio's voices faded back into static, their message delivered. I stood in the waiting room until my watch showed 5 a.m., wrestling with impossible choices. Dawn was 2 hours away. 2 hours to maintain the status quo, to keep the balance Patricia and the rules demanded. After that, I could think. I could plan. I could figure out what to do next. At 5:47 a.m., I completed my final rounds. The eastern wing was quiet, all patients still sleeping peacefully. When I passed room 3B, I stopped and pressed my palm against the green door. The wood was cold, far colder than it should have been, and I could feel a faint vibration like a heartbeat. "I haven't forgotten my promise," I whispered. "I'm working on it, Lily. I just need time." From inside came a response, so faint I almost missed it. "Time is all I have. Time and darkness and singing." I'm so tired of singing, nurse. So tired of being alone. Tears stream down my face. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The shadow man says you're different. Says you might actually try. But trying isn't enough. People have tried before. They all failed. They all left me here. Her voice was changing, becoming less childlike, more bitter. Maybe I don't want to be saved anymore. Maybe I want company. Maybe if you break the rules, if you come inside, we can be alone together forever. I jerked my hand away from the door, suddenly aware of how close I'd come to doing exactly that. Lily wasn't just a victim anymore. 54 years of isolation and suffering had twisted her into something else, something that could be dangerous. The child she'd been might still exist somewhere inside the entity she'd become. But how much humanity could survive that long in the dark? Dr. Vale had been right. I wasn't ready. Neither was Lily. If I opened that door now, motivated by sympathy without understanding, I'd create a disaster. I needed knowledge, preparation, and most importantly, a genuine solution rather than just emotional reaction. Patricia arrived at 7 a.m. to find me sitting at the reception desk, exhausted and shaken, but determined. She took one look at my face and sighed deeply. What did you do? I didn't break any rules, I assured her, but I talked to her, to Lily, and to the voices in the radio. I'm learning, Patricia. I'm figuring out how this place works. That's what worries me. She set down her bag and crossed her arms. Elena, I see that look in your eyes. I've seen it before in other staff members who thought they could fix what's wrong here. It never ends well. Then help me, I pleaded. You've been researching for 2 years. You must have found something useful, some lead we could follow. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, internal debate clear on her face. Finally, she reached in her bag and pulled out a business card, worn and creased from being carried for years. There's someone, a woman who used to work here in the 1990s. She was a night nurse like you, and she became obsessed with helping the trapped souls. She left before things got too bad. Now she runs a sort of consultancy, helping people deal with supernatural problems. I took the card. The name printed, there was Dr. Margaret Chun, followed by a phone number and an address in Edmonton. Does she know how to free someone from the space between? I don't know. I've never contacted her because I've been too afraid of making things worse. But if anyone has answers, it would be Margaret. Patricia gripped my shoulder, her expression grave. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't do anything rash. I promise. I meant it. Though we both knew promises made in places like this had a tendency to twist into unexpected shapes. I left the clinic as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the building looking almost normal in the morning light. But I knew the truth now. I understood what lurked in its hallways, what suffered in its walls. And I had a lead, a possible path toward actually helping Lily instead of just maintaining the prison around her. The drive home was a blur. I showered, changed clothes, and immediately called the number on Dr. Chen's card. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, professional but warm. Chen Consulting. How can I help you? My name is Elena Hartley. I'm a night nurse at Clearwater Medical Clinic, and I need to speak with Dr. Chun about a trapped spirit. It's urgent. There was a long pause. When a woman spoke again, her tone had changed completely, becoming sharp with concern. You're working at Clearwater? At night? How long have you been there? This is my 2nd shift. Dear God, stay on the line. I'm transferring you to Margaret directly. Whatever you do, don't go back there tonight. Not until we've talked. The line clicked, classical music playing for what felt like an eternity. Then a new voice came through, older, tinged with an accent I couldn't place. This is Margaret Chun. Tell me everything about room 3B. Tell me what you've seen, what you've heard, and most importantly, tell me if she's asked you for help. She has, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She said, please. She's so tired, Dr. Chun. 54 years of being trapped, and she's still aware enough to suffer. I need to help her. Margaret Chen was silent for so long, I thought the connection had dropped. Then she said words that changed everything. I think I know how to save Lily Morgenstern, but it's going to require breaking every single rule in that clinic, and there's a very high chance we'll all die trying. When can you come to Edmonton? I drove to Edmonton the next morning, exhaustion making the 3-hour journey feel twice as long. Dr. Margaret Chen lived in a modest house in an older neighborhood, the kind of place that looked utterly ordinary until you noticed the iron horseshoes above every door and the salt lines along every windowsill. She answered on the first knock, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Elena Hartley, she said, studying me with an intensity that felt almost clinical. You look like hell, which means you're taking the night shift seriously. Come in. We have a lot to discuss and not much time. Her home office was unlike anything I'd expected. One wall was covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and maps connected by red string in a conspiracy theorist dream. But this wasn't paranoia. It was documentation. Decades worth of research into Clearwater Medical Clinic and the cursed land it occupied. Another wall held books, hundreds of them, covering everything from quantum physics to indigenous spirituality to medieval demonology. Margaret poured us both coffee, strong and black, and gestured for me to sit. Before we discuss saving Lily, you need to understand what you're actually dealing with. The space between isn't a place. It's a state of existence, a dimensional pocket where the normal rules of reality don't apply. Lily isn't trapped in room 3B. She's trapped in a fold that room 3B touches, a bubble of distorted space-time that overlaps with our world at that specific location. She pulled up a diagram on her computer, showing what looked like a sheet of fabric pinched and twisted in on itself. Imagine reality as a flat plane. The cursed land at Clearwater creates a depression in that plane, a gravitational anomaly where traumatic events cause tears. Lily fell through one of those tears in 1971, and she's been existing in a fold ever since. She's not dead. Death would be merciful. She's suspended, caught between existence and non-existence, aware of both states simultaneously. The voices in the radio told me that freeing someone requires a trade, one soul to replace another. That's the traditional method. Yes, it's how shamanic practices work. The healer enters the underworld and bargains for the soul's return. But traditional methods assume you're dealing with traditional spirits. Lily isn't a spirit. She's a living person caught in a dimensional anomaly. We don't need mysticism. We need physics. Margaret switched to another diagram, this one showing wave patterns and mathematical equations I couldn't begin to understand. Every entity trapped in the space between maintains their existence through observation. As long as something is aware of them, whether it's people hearing them, sensing them, or interacting with their environment, they remain coherent. Stop the observation, sever all connections, and the entity wouldn't normally dissipate. But Lily has an anchor. Room 3B. Exactly. The room itself has become quantum entangled with her existence. As long as that room exists, as long as it maintains its specific spatial coordinates and structural integrity, Lily remains trapped. The maintenance sign, the rules about never entering, they're not protecting us from her. They're protecting the anchor, ensuring it stays stable. So to free her, we destroy the room? Not quite. Margaret's expression was grim. Destroying the room without properly severing the entanglement would be catastrophic. Lily's existence would collapse inward, and the dimensional fold would implode, potentially taking everything within a 100-meter radius with it. We need to carefully dismantle the entanglement first, then destabilize the anchor in a controlled manner. Ow! Margaret stood and walked to a locked cabinet, removing a metal case. Inside were objects that looked like they belonged in a science fiction film. Crystalline structures attached to electronic devices, handheld scanners with displays showing incomprehensible symbols, and something that looked like a modified cattle prod crackling with blue energy. I've spent 30 years developing these tools, she explained. They work at the intersection of physics and metaphysics, manipulating quantum states in ways that shouldn't be possible, but somehow are. This, she held up one of the crystalline devices, is a quantum resonance detector. It can map the entanglement between Lily and her anchor point. Once we have that map, we can use this, she indicated the energy device, to systematically sever each connection. And then we enter room 3B, establish direct contact with Lily, and guide her consciousness back in a linear time. It's essentially the reverse of what happened in 1971. Instead of falling into the fold, we pull her out of it. If it works, she'll die properly, as she should have 54 years ago. Her consciousness will disperse naturally, and she'll finally find peace. If it works, I repeated, and if it doesn't, we'll become trapped alongside her, or the dimensional fold will collapse and kill us instantly. Or, worst case scenario, we'll succeed in freeing her, but her consciousness will be so twisted by decades of torture that she'll become something far worse than what she is now. A fully manifested entity with 54 years of suffering to take out on the living world. The coffee sat cold and forgotten as I processed this information. You're talking about risking our lives and potentially unleashing something terrible, all for the sake of one child who's already been dead for 5 decades. Yes, Margaret's voice was firm, because it's the right thing to do, because no one deserves what Lily has endured, and because if we don't help her soon, she'll deteriorate completely. You've noticed her becoming bitter, angry? That's the beginning of the end. Another few years, and there won't be any humanity left to save. She'll transform fully into a malevolent entity, and then the rules will stop working. The containment will fail, and everyone who works at or visits the clinic will be at risk. She showed me her research on entities that had undergone similar transformations. Spirits that started as victims but became predators, twisted by endless suffering into things that existed only to inflict pain on others. Lily is close to that tipping point. We have a narrow window to save her before she crosses into irredeemable territory. Why now? Why didn't you try this years ago? I couldn't. The technology wasn't ready, and I was too afraid. But then I got your call, heard about someone new working the night shift who actually cared about helping rather than just enduring. I realized this might be our only chance. Lily is fixated on you, Elena. She's watching you, hoping you'll save her. That attention, that connection, we can use it. It'll make the extraction easier. I thought about Patricia's warnings, about all the previous nurses who'd tried to help and failed. But they'd tried with superstition and good intentions. Margaret had science, real tools, real understanding. When do we do this? Tonight. We can't wait. Every day, Lily deteriorates further, and your next shift is the perfect opportunity. The clinic will be mostly empty, minimal risk to patients. We go in, perform the procedure, and hopefully end Lily's suffering once and for all. Patricia will never allow it. Then we don't tell Patricia. Margaret's expression was sympathetic but resolved. I understand she's been kind to you, but she's also part of the system that's kept Lily trapped for decades. Sometimes mercy requires breaking rules, even ones that exist for good reasons. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Margaret taught me how to use the quantum devices, how to read the entanglement patterns, and most importantly, how to remain mentally stable when confronting the space between. It'll try to convince you to stay, she warned. The fold is seductive, offering escape from all pain and responsibility. You'll need to anchor yourself to something in linear time, something that reminds you why existence matters despite suffering. At 9 p.m., we loaded Margaret's equipment into my car and began the drive back to Clearwater. The sun set behind us, painting the highway in shades of blood orange and deep purple. Neither of us spoke much. We both knew the magnitude of what we were attempting and the very real possibility that we might not survive the night. We arrived at the clinic at 10:30 p.m. Patricia was just leaving, and her eyes widened when she saw Margaret. "Dr. Chen, what are you doing here?" "Finishing what I started 30 years ago," Margaret replied calmly. "Don't try to stop us, Patricia. This needs to happen." Patricia looked at me, betrayal and fear mingling in her expression. "Elena, please. You don't know what you're doing. People have died trying this. People have died doing nothing, too." I replied, more harshly than intended. "At least this way we're trying. At least Lily has a chance." Patricia stepped aside, though tears streamed down her face. "If you're going to do this, wait until after midnight. The dimensional boundary is thinnest then. You'll have a better chance of success." She paused at her car, looking back at us. "I'll stay nearby. When things go wrong, I'll call for help. It's all I can do." Margaret and I entered the clinic together, carrying cases of equipment. The familiar flickering lights and oppressive atmosphere greeted us. But tonight, they felt different. Tonight, we were hunters rather than prey. We were coming to end the horror rather than merely survive it. We set up our equipment in the hallway outside room 3B. The quantum resonance detector hummed to life, its display showing a complex web of lines connecting the green door to something beyond. Margaret studied the patterns, occasionally adjusting settings and muttering to herself. "The entanglement is extensive, more than I expected. This is going to take time." From inside the room came Lily's voice, curious and hopeful. "Someone new is here. Someone who knows things. Are you here to help me? Really help me? We're going to try, Lily." I called through the door. "But you need to be patient. We need to prepare. I've been patient for 54 years. What a few more hours?" Despite her words, her voice held an edge, a hint of the bitterness that had been growing. "Unless you're lying too. Unless you're just like all the others who promised and failed." Margaret began the severing process, using the energy device to target specific points in the entanglement. Each time she fired it, the hallway lights flickered and the temperature dropped. The clinic itself seemed to react, groaning like a living thing in pain. After the third severance, doors began slamming throughout the building, and the radio in the old waiting room burst into violent static. "We're destabilizing the entire system," Margaret warned. "The other entities are reacting. We need to move faster." But faster meant riskier. On the sixth severance, something went wrong. The energy device sparked and Margaret cried out, dropping it as electricity arced across her hands. The quantum detector showed the entanglement trying to repair itself, lines reconnecting almost as quickly as we severed them. "It's fighting back," Margaret gasped, clutching her burned hands. "The fold doesn't want to lose its anchor. Elena, you'll need to finish this. I'll guide you, but you have to be the one to sever the remaining connections." I picked up the energy device, its handle warm and crackling with residual charge. Following Margaret's instructions, I targeted the next point in the entanglement and fired. The recoil nearly knocked me down, and the hallway exploded with activity. Dr. Vale appeared at the end of the corridor, his alien features twisted in something like rage. The collector's shadow manifested on every wall simultaneously, reaching toward us with dark fingers. "Stop," Dr. Vale commanded, his voice reverberating with unnatural power. "You're disrupting the balance. You're threatening everything we built here. We're freeing an innocent child from eternal suffering." I shot back, firing the device again. Another connection severed. "If that disrupts your balance, then your balance is wrong." The shadow hands reached us, cold and grasping, but couldn't seem to touch us. Something about Margaret's equipment created a barrier they couldn't cross. Dr. Vale advanced anyway, his form becoming more solid, more threatening. "I tried to warn you. I tried to tell you that you weren't ready. Now you'll join her in the fold, and the clinic will have 2 nurses trapped for eternity. But before he could reach us, Lily's voice rang out, powerful and commanding. Don't touch them. They're trying to help me. They're actually trying. If you stop them, I'll make your existence hell, doctor. I've learned things in the darkness. Things about how to hurt entities like you. Dr. Vale froze, clearly weighing the threat. Finally, he stepped back. Finish it quickly then, before the fold collapses entirely and takes us all with it. I severed the remaining connections in rapid succession, ignoring the pain as energy feedback burned my hands, ignoring the chaos as the clinic itself seemed to scream in protest. Finally, the detector showed all entanglement severed. The anchor was destabilized. Room 3B was ready. Now we go in, Margaret said, struggling to her feet. We make contact with Lily and guide her back to linear time. Elena, you need to take the lead on this. She trusts you more than me. I approached the green door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. This was it. The moment everything either ended well or ended catastrophically. I thought of Patricia's warnings, of all the nurses who'd failed before me, of the very real possibility that I'd never leave this room alive. But I also thought of Lily, a 6-year-old girl who'd spent over 50 years trapped in nightmare, who sang to maintain her sanity, who drew pictures to remember what it felt like to be human, who still had enough hope left to ask for help. She deserved better than eternal suffering. She deserved peace. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Room 3B was exactly as the 1971 reports had described. A small patient room with dated wallpaper and a single bed. Except the walls were breathing, expanding, and contracting like lungs. The bed sat at wrong angles to the floor, perspective distorted in ways that hurt to observe. And floating in the center of it all was Lily. She looked exactly 6 years old, blonde hair and pigtails, wearing the pajamas she'd died in. But her eyes were ancient, containing decades of suffering compressed into a child's face. When she saw me, she smiled, a heartbreaking expression of pure hope. You came inside. You really came. I promised I would try, I said, stepping into the room. Margaret followed, her burned hands clutching the quantum detector. Lily, we're going to help you, but you need to trust us completely. Can you do that? She nodded, and I saw tears streaming down her ethereal face. I'm ready. I've been ready for so long. Please just make it stop. Make the singing stop. Make the darkness stop. Let me sleep. Margaret set up the final device, a crystalline structure that pulsed with soft blue light. Lily, I need you to focus on this light. Let it become your anchor, replacing the room. Can you do that for me? Lily floated closer to the crystal, mesmerized by its glow. As she approached, her form became more solid, more real. Margaret whispered to me, when I activate the sequence, the fold will attempt to pull us all in. You need to grab Lily and physically pull her toward the door. Get her across the threshold back into normal space. Once she's out of the fold, her quantum state will collapse and she'll die properly. Do you understand? I understood. I will be pulling a little girl to her death. But that death would be mercy compared to what she endured. I'm ready. Margaret activated the crystal. The rune screamed. Not with sound, but with pressure, reality itself warping as the dimensional fold began to collapse. Lily's eyes widened in terror as she felt herself being pulled backward, deeper into the space between. No, not back. Please not back. I lunged forward, grabbing her small hand. It was solid, real, cold as ice, but undeniably physical. I've got you. Hold on. The fold pulled harder, trying to reclaim its prisoner. The walls of room 3B twisted impossibly, floor and ceiling merging, the doors seeming to retreat farther away. But I held on to Lily with everything I had, dragging us both toward the threshold. Margaret grabbed my waist, adding her strength to mine. The two of us fighting against the dimensional anomaly's desperate attempt to maintain its existence. It hurts, Lily cried. It hurts so much. Let me go. Just let me go. No, I screamed back. You've suffered enough. You're going home, Lily. You're finally going home. With a final desperate heave, we crossed the threshold. The moment Lily's form passed through the doorway back into normal space, everything stopped. The pulling ceased. The screaming pressure vanished. And Lily's ethereal form became fully, briefly, beautifully solid. She looked down at her hands, at her body, experiencing physical existence for the first time in 54 years. I can feel again, she whispered in wonder. I can feel. Then she began to fade, not violently but gently, like morning mist under sunrise. She looked up at me, and her expression was pure gratitude. Thank you. Thank you for remembering me. Thank you for not leaving me alone. I'm sorry it took so long, I said through my tears. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. You came. That's more than anyone else did. She was barely visible now, her form dissolving in a soft light. Tell my parents I forgive them. Tell them I'm not afraid anymore. Tell them I can finally sleep. And then she was gone. Simply, quietly, peacefully gone. The ancient suffering that had haunted room 3B for over 5 decades dissipated like smoke, leaving only an ordinary room with dated wallpaper and a musty smell. Behind us, the hallway had returned to normal. The flickering lights steadied. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Dr. Vale stood at the end of the corridor, his wrong features somehow softened. She's free, he said simply. After all this time, someone finally freed her. The collector's shadow appeared on the wall one final time, not reaching or grasping, but seeming almost to bow before fading away. Even the voices in the radio had quieted, their static muted as though in respect for the departed. Margaret and I stumbled out of the clinic at 3:47 a.m., our hands burned, our bodies exhausted, but our hearts lighter than they'd been in days. Patricia waited in the parking lot, and when she saw us alive and walking, she burst into tears of relief. You actually did it, she said in disbelief. You actually freed her. We did, I confirmed. Lily Morgenstern is finally at rest. The sun rose over Clearwater Medical Clinic that morning, and for the first time in decades, the building looked almost peaceful in the golden light. The curse wasn't broken. The land was still wrong, still hungry, but one source of suffering had ended. One trapped soul had found release. I completed my notice the next day, not because I was running away, but because the clinic no longer needed a night shift. With Lily's anchor severed and the dimensional fold collapsed, the supernatural activity had diminished dramatically. The rules became less necessary, the darkness less oppressive. The remaining entities, Dr. Vale, the collector, the voices in the radio, had quieted, as though Lily's freedom had given them hope that perhaps, someday, they too might find peace. Margaret returned to Edmonton, taking her equipment and her research with her. But we stayed in contact, planning future interventions, future rescues. Because Clearwater wasn't the only cursed location in the world, there were other trapped souls, other places where reality wore thin and suffering became eternal. And now we knew how to help them. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded from the clinic. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 1971, showing a school photograph of a smiling 6-year-old girl with blonde hair and pigtails. On the back, someone had written in careful handwriting, "Thank you for bringing our daughter home. We've waited so long for closure. We finally found peace." Mr. and Mrs. Morgenstern. They'd both been dead for over a decade, according to the obituary attached. But somehow, across whatever barriers separates the living from the dead, they'd known. They'd felt their daughter's release, her transition from eternal suffering to peaceful rest. I keep that photograph on my desk now, a reminder of why breaking rules sometimes matters more than following them. A reminder that mercy can require courage, and that salvation often demands sacrifice. And a reminder of a little girl who sang in the darkness for 54 years, never losing hope that someone, someday, would finally hear her and care enough to help. The night shift at Clearwater Medical Clinic is staffed by a rotating schedule of regular nurses now. No more bizarre rules. No more eternal terror. Just ordinary night shifts in an ordinary clinic. But sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, staff members report hearing something beautiful drifting through the hallways. The sound of child singing, clear and joyful and finally, blessedly free. The end.